We are talking with David Schultz, who is the current president of the board of directors of the Classic Car Club of America. Welcome, Dave. You are the fearless leader, the flag carrier, the face of the Classic Car Club as we know it in 2012.
Well, that's unfortunate for the club.
No, you sell yourself short. David, a lot of people know your name. A lot of people read what you write, but they don't know a lot about David. Tell me, first of all...
Sometimes that's the way I like it.
Well, I understand. Tell me, how long have you been a member of the Classic Car Club of America?
I joined in 1965 when I was 21 years old.
Wow. And you've been a member of the board for a few years too, right?
This is my 7th year.
So you've got a couple more to go.
Yes.
A lot more work to be done, I'm sure.
Yes.
Let's go back to 1967. Let's think about the way the Classic Car Club was back then through your 21-year-old eyes. What do you think's changed through the years? What's been the biggest change, if anything?
Well, I think the biggest change is that when I went to when you go to a Classic Car Club event in the late 60s, early 70s, you saw a lot of classic cars. It was uncommon to see a non-classic car at a CCCA event. And you saw people having a good time, and people weren't driving cars like they were made out of glass. The Buck Hill Falls meet, people drove cars in the snow to Buck Hill Falls. It was not uncommon to drive your car as often as you could, everywhere you could. And I'd say that's the biggest change from the late 60s, early 70s to today, is there are trailers. 40 years ago, very few people had trailers. They drove their cars everywhere.
Wasn't it true at one point that you couldn't trailer a car to a CCCA?
It was. But people, there was reason that people bought the cars, is they wanted to drive the cars and they wanted to live the experience of driving a car from the 20s and 30s.
So as the years have gone by and the hobby, at least the classic car hobby, has evolved, these cars have gone from something that is driven to maybe something that's been shown, and do you think that's equated because the value has increased, or because the membership has changed, or what do you think is the reason for that?
Well, the value certainly had an effect on it. People, a lot of people are very reluctant to take a $500,000 car out on a tour. On the other hand, I've known people who have 7-figure cars who've taken them out on 90-mile tours and then exhibit them at a concours the next day. So it comes down to the individual owner and what his or her expectations are. And there's no question, there are people who collect cars the way they collect artwork or any other objet d'art and put very few miles on them. And sometimes the most miles those cars get is on and off a trailer. It's unfortunate because these are automobiles. They're not paintings. They're not silver. They're vehicles that were meant to be driven and enjoyed.
Do you think part of that is maybe the public perception of our cars too? Maybe because you own a car, you look at it maybe a little differently than the public would, and do you think that that's driven some of these changes?
No, somewhat. I mean, people will see me, my car just parked someplace, and they're like on the tour to Galena, Illinois this summer, and they'll say, well, how'd you get the car here? So, well, I drove it. Really? This car will drive that far? I said, I could drive this car to California this afternoon. He said it was everyday transportation once upon a time, and that hasn't changed. It's still 4 wheels, headlights, and a steering wheel, and it's just degrees of comfort and mechanical reliability.
Interesting. Tell me about David Schultz. What kind of cars does he have in the garage?
Well, today David has a 1922 Lincoln Sport Phaeton, a 1930 Lincoln Judkins Coupe, and a 1931 Lincoln Town Sedan.
There seems to be a reoccurring theme there, and it starts with the letter L.
Oh yes, Lincolns. Al, over the years, I owned a number of different cars, like most guys. And I had a couple of Packards, I had a Cord, I had a Locomobile, a Chrysler Imperial, and those were all cars that kind of fit a purpose. I wanted to own those cars, see what it was like to drive them, mainly, enjoy them. I'd read about them, and I discovered Lincoln seriously about 20-some years ago. In fact, the car that kind of brought me to it was the 31 Town Sedan that it belonged to an old timer who I met in the Michigan region when I joined in 1965, Sam Dibble, and I lusted after Sam's car. And I stayed in touch with Sam, and finally Sam acquiesced and sold me the car, and I really got to know that car, really enjoyed it, and said, these are really great, understated, undervalued automobiles, and they're great drivers to boot. So that put me on the path to buying more Lincolns.
So it sounds to me like what your favorite part of owning a classic car is the driving experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, a friend of mine joked with me one time that the best award your car can get is a stone chip.
Can relate to that. What do you do away from the club? What does David do when the snows are flying in Central Ohio?
I walk my dog a lot. I'm semi-retired, and I do automobile appraisals now and pre-purchase inspections. And that's pretty much how I spend my time. I've taken what was my hobby and turned it into somewhat of an avocation in my retirement. But I'm also active in my local community. I'm a museum trustee there. In fact, I'm also a museum trustee of the Classic Car Club Museum and the Lincoln Motor Car Foundation Museum. So I have no lack of projects.
I happen to know that you are a former newspaperman,
That's
scribe,
right.
Or however you'd like to.
I'll accept that.
However you'd like to describe it, and I know you've done quite a bit of writing. Do you still currently write for publications?
Yes, I do. I'm a columnist for Hemmings Classic Car, and I do occasional writing for whoever will publish what I write, and that really is one of my hobbies. I really enjoy writing.
But one thing you do for the Classic Car Club is you do write for them also.
Oh, sure,
yeah.
sure. Going back to when I was a member, I would write articles for the Classic Car when Bev Kimes was editor, and then of course when I became a board member, I had to pitch in and write about what I did as a committee chairman. And my other duties, and so now I write a president's column in every issue of the Bulletin, and I enjoy it. I mean, I just enjoy making the club a better organization.
Would you describe yourself as a historian or a student of automobile history?
Oh, absolutely. I would never want to be identified as a car collector. I really consider myself a historian, and as you and I both know, we're just taking care of these cars for the next group that comes along, and someday I'll be vetting somebody the way I was vetted by Sam Dibble to buy his Lincoln. And I'll be happy to turn that car over to a good caretaker someday.
Well, you're probably happy to see that a lot of our publications are dedicated to a certain amount of historical background on the automobiles and the marks.
Absolutely. The best part, I think, of owning these cars is not just driving them. That's a big part. But I've always tried to trace the history of my cars, who owned them, what they did with them. And again, my 31 Lincoln, I know that car was driven new, or almost new, from Queens, New York to Chicago for the World's Fair in 1933 and back. And that family, mother, father, and their son, did a round trip to the World's Fair with that car. So when people say, I wonder what they did with these cars when they were new, that's what they did.
I totally agree with you. Sometimes the cars are interesting and beautiful, but the stories behind them are just spectacular.
Absolutely. And I think anybody who's able to find the history of his or her car is truly blessed. And I always encourage people to look through scraps of paper and receipts and gas ration cards. Look for a name on there. That's how I found the owner of my 31 Lincoln. And my Cord was that way. My Locomobile, we were able to trace that back to a fellow who was a major partner in Dillon Reed in New York City, and was involved in, at that time, the biggest business transaction in the United States when Dillon Reed bought Chrysler for $144 million in 1925, and the fellow who owned my Locomobile was part of that transaction.
Fascinating, fascinating. Little detective work goes a long way.
Well, you do. You have to, but it's fun when you finally hit pay dirt. It's very rewarding.
CSI classic car style.
I'll be happy to advise anybody who wants to pursue it.
One last question, David. We're seeing a lot of members. We're seeing a lot of younger interest in the younger crowd. Any message for a new member and maybe a younger member? Think back again to 1967. Anything that you'd like to leave with them?
Well, I'd say, follow your dreams. If you're looking at buying a car, do your research, find out what you really like, and buy it. And buy as much car as you can buy at that time, because it doesn't cost much different to restore a modest price car or a lower price car than a classic. And if you want a classic, buy the best classic you can buy. The other thing is to join the Classic Car Club, join a Mark Club, and network and get to know people. And my experience is that the people who own these cars are like me. They're usually very passionate about them. They'll sit down and they'll probably tell you more than you want to know about the club, about the marks. And then as a young person, I'd say, get behind the wheel and drive these cars. Find out how much fun it is to drive them versus going to a show and getting another award that you can stick in your garage.
Sage advice. Thank you, David.
My pleasure.
I appreciate your time, and thank you for everything you've done for this car club.